Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido's diplomatic envoy to the United Kingdom resigns, citing a lack of payments promised by the United States. German Chancellor Angela Merkel announces the extension of the current pandemic restrictions until January 10th. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered health officials to start widespread vaccinations next week, adding that Russia has produced close to 2 million doses of its Sputnik V vaccine. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido's diplomatic envoy to the United Kingdom has resigned, citing a lack of payment promised by the United States. In a report published by the British newspapers The Financial Times, Guaido's representatives in the UK, Vanessa Newman, said she had quit over doubts regarding Guaido's future role in the Venezuelan opposition and delays in Washington releasing Venezuelan government funds it had frozen to the opposition sector. The U.S. State Department's Special Envoy for Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, said the funds have been approved, but that their release will not come overnight. Self-declared president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido's team is currently unable to pay the legal costs stemming from his defeat in British appeals court, which overturned an initial ruling that recognized Guaido in a battle over Venezuelan gold held in the Bank of England. And the preparations for Venezuela's parliamentary elections to be held on Sunday are advancing. Military personnel are being deployed as part of the Republican plan, the guaranteed peace and the security and transparency of the voting process. Around 200,000 troops from the Bolivarian National Armed Forces have been sent to the different regions of the country, while the National Electoral Council continues to advance the distribution of the necessary electoral materials to all states. Meanwhile, the international delegations that will observe and accompany the election process continue to arrive in the South American nation. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, foreign direct investment in the region will fall by up to 55% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The figures represent the world's most pronounced regional decline, the Commission noted in a report released at its headquarters in the Chilean capital Santiago this Wednesday. The fall of foreign investment has been a constant since 2012, when the region reached its historical maximum based on a boom in raw materials. Among the worst performing countries are Peru, where investment fell by 72% in the third quarter, followed by Colombia with a fall of 50% and Brazil of 45%. Only Mexico has held up relatively well, with a drop of 6% in the third quarter.
Being in 2020, we are going to experience a worldwide drop of 40% in direct investment, and in Latin America, the drop will range between 45% and 55%. It is a region where foreign direct investment will fall most worldwide, and obviously the fall impacts all productive sectors.
The Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, Irwin LaRocque, presented a series of proposals to guarantee health development in the region in view of the vulnerability of Caribbean nations to the effects of climate change. According to the CARICOM chief, the overall health effects of a changing climate are overwhelmingly negative, as climate change affects many of the social and environmental determinants of health: clean air, safe drinking water, adequate food supply, and secure shelter. The Caribbean Community has thus launched the Strengthening Climate Resilient Health Systems in the Caribbean, a project which LaRocque described as critical at this time, which will address the need to shore up the resilience of the region to the impacts of the economic, health, environmental, and social crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. The member countries of the Central American Integration System have proposed the formation of a common front in order to obtain funds to rebuild the region hard hit by hurricanes and the coronavirus pandemic. Residents of the Central American nations and the Dominican Republic suggested use of the system mechanism in order to process requests for resources to the Inter-American Development Bank and the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. As part of the discussions, the pro tempore president of the system, the Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega, stressed that the planet faces the challenge of containing global warming to avoid more serious environmental catastrophes. Meanwhile, other regional leaders call on the United Nations to recognize Central America as the area most affected by climate change. In this sense, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, pointed out that the region should be a priority for international aid. And Peru's Minister of Labor, Javier Palacios, announced during a dialogue table with the agrarian workers of the ECA department that a bill will be presented to Congress to repeal the labor chapter of the agrarian law. Likewise, Palacios announced the elimination of the services companies, which are the ones that hire the personnel that work in the fields of the agricultural companies. After 3 days of protests, the Minister of Labor indicated that 4 working tables are being formed to develop channels of dialogue. Meanwhile, farm workers will suspend their demonstrations until midnight this Wednesday, but they clarified that the protest will continue until an agreement is reached to increase their wages, which is among their demands that also include the repeal of the agrarian law and the promulgation of a special agrarian law. The director of the Pan American Health Organization warned Wednesday of the rapid increase in COVID-19 cases throughout the region, while also speaking out against racism in regional healthcare systems.
This past week, 1.6 million new cases and 22,000 deaths from COVID-19 were reported in our region. In the month of November alone, we had over 6 million new cases reported in the Americas. That is nearly a 30% increase from the numbers at the end of October. The roots of many of these inequities are entangled in our region's long and complex colonial history, which is stained by social injustice and the enslavement of Africans, a heritage that we have not yet overcome and we see play out in our health systems. Indeed, systemic racism may pose barriers to appropriate care, result in mistrust in health providers, and ultimately cause worse outcomes for Black patients in many countries in our region. COVID-19 has shed a harsh light on this reality, and against the backdrop of urgent calls for racial equality in the United States, Brazil, and other countries in our region, we urge health authorities to face this pressing challenge.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Ecuador, the presidential candidate for the Union for Hope coalition, Andrés Araúz, has denounced the launch of a coup against democracy in reference to the persecution that the government of Lenín Moreno is carrying out against progressive forces of the country.
At this moment, I want to emphasize that what Ecuador is experiencing is a coup against democracy. That coup is on the way right now, and it is important to avoid it. There have been years of persecution against progressive forces. We have seen explicit threats like that of Juan Roldan, who told candidates linked to Correa that they would be imprisoned and that the justice system would be watching them. This was the cause of a request for an injunction that I presented in the Inter-American System for the Protection of Human Rights.
And the presidential candidate warned that allies of the government of Lenín Moreno are seeking to prevent the holding of the presidential elections scheduled for February 2021.
We have seen a clear demonstration from the allies of the government of Moreno who have presented requests at the international level so that the elections do not take place. Watch out, they are not seeking to guarantee participation. They are seeking to prevent elections on February 7th, 2021. This should raise the alarms for all Latin America and the entire planet.
De gran magnitud para toda América Latina y para todo el planeta.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the governors of the country's 16 federal states agreed this Wednesday to extend the current pandemic restrictions until January the 10th. Merkel explained that Germany had still not achieved its goal of reducing this rate of infections to 50 cases per 100,000 inhabitants in a week. The agreement means restaurants, bars and gyms will remain shut and limits on personal contacts will be maintained into the new year, though all sides agreed to ease some restrictions over the Christmas period. Merkel also expressed confidence in the process led by the European Medicines Agency to review coronavirus vaccine candidates for approval.
If the infection rate keeps going at the rate we've seen the last few days, then we will meet each other again on January 4th. The state will keep the restrictions from December 20th until January 10th. That means that basically everything will stay as is right now, with the exception of the Christmas regulations until January 10th. On January 4th, we will discuss how it will go on, always keeping an eye on the pandemic situation and the question at which point of the pandemic we are.
Online press conference, executives of German law BioNTech noted their commitment to fair allocation across all countries that wish to obtain the vaccine developed with American firm Pfizer. The two companies have said they expect to supply up to 50 million doses globally in 2020 and up to 1.3 billion in 2021.
Beginning to deliver this vaccine to the world, and that means fair allocations across all countries that wish to have our vaccine. So no, not all of the doses that we produce go to the UK. The UK gets, like every country, a fair proportion.
It is important to have an impact on the pandemic. The vaccine needs to reach sufficient number of people, and there are a number of models indicating that an impact on the pandemic spread starts to happen if 30% of people are vaccinated, but we will have only get a full effect if we reach about 60 to 70% of the people having a protective immune response, and that should be the aim, to get this coverage until end of summer next year.
And the UN Secretary General denounced a societal failure to combat global warming this Wednesday, while stressing that recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic could be humanity's chance to work to save the planet.
To put it simply, the state of the planet is broken. Dear friends, humanity is waging war on nature. This is suicidal. Nature always strikes back, and it is already doing so with growing force and fury. COVID-19 lockdowns have temporarily reduced the emissions and pollution. But carbon dioxide levels are still at record highs and rising. In 2019, carbon dioxide levels reached 148% of pre-industrial levels. In 2020, the upward trend has continued despite the pandemic. COVID recovery and our planet's repair must be the two sides of the same coin. The world has not met any of the global biodiversity targets set for 2020. And so we need much more ambition and greater commitment to deliver on measurable targets and means of implementation, particularly finance and monitoring mechanism.
Hundreds of Indonesians have fled their villages after a rumbling volcano spewed hot ash thousands of meters into the air and belched lava down its crater. Mount Semeru on Java Island spotted the towering column on Tuesday, prompting a call for around 500 people to temporarily evacuate their homes. Footage from the scenes showed dead livestock covered by pyroclastic flows, a fast-moving mixture of hot gas and volcanic material, as steaming debris flow into a nearby river. The chief of the local disaster agency, Triono, warned on Wednesday that residents could still be at risk, and heavy rains threatened to trigger more volcanic flows from the still-spewing crater. Indonesia is home to about 130 active volcanoes due to its position on the Ring of Fire. And China's foreign minister on Wednesday said the country has devoted to peace and international cooperation in outer space after the Chang'e 5 probe successfully landed on the moon.
I would like to emphasize that China has always been committed to the peaceful use of outer space and has been actively engaged in international exchanges and cooperation to share the results of space development. China will continue to promote international cooperation and the exploration and use of outer space in the spirit of working for the benefit of all mankind and with an open and inclusive attitude. Let's look forward to the safe return of the Chang'e 5 probe.
And Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, under pressure following months of street protests, survived a legal challenge this Wednesday that could have seen him thrown out of office. The kingdom's 9-judge constitutional court ruled that the Prime Minister was not guilty of conflict of interest by living in an army residence after leaving the military. The court ruled that this status as Prime Minister entitled him to live in the house, even though he stepped down as army chief in 2014. As the judgment was read out, about 3,000 protesters massed for a fresh rally at a major intersection in northern Bangkok. Many of the protesters carried inflatable yellow dogs, which have become a symbol of the pro-democracy movement, which is calling for the PM's resignation, reform of the monarchy, and a new constitution. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered health officials to start widespread vaccinations next week, adding that Russia has produced close to 2 million doses of its Sputnik V vaccine. The announcement came on the same day that British authorities approved the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for a rollout starting next week. Last week, Russia reported interim test results showing Sputnik V was 95% effective, rivaling international competitors. The vaccine is currently in its third and final stage of clinical trials involving some 40,000 volunteers. Putin noted that teachers and medics will be the first to receive the jab. The vaccine will be free to all Russian citizens and inoculation will be voluntary.
Ask you to organize the work so that by the end of next week we will have started this large-scale vaccination. More than 2 million doses have been produced or will be produced in the next few days.
This Wednesday, the foreign ministers of Russia and Azerbaijan discussed the mechanism for the implementation of the ceasefire that brought peace back to the Nagorno-Karabakh region. The two diplomats held a conference call, during which, in addition to addressing compliance with the Russian-brokered peace agreement signed on November the 9th, they discussed the regional and international agenda. Following the agreement between the Azerbaijan and Armenia, Russia sent peacekeeping forces to the former conflict zone and installed 23 checkpoints to ensure that the parties remain in their current positions, undertake the exchanges of prisoners of war, and transfer the bodies to the victims of the fighting. In Armenia, citizens have demanded the resignation of the Prime Minister following the signing of the peace agreement with Azerbaijan, which protesters describe as a betrayal of the country's interests. About 4,000 demonstrators rallied in the streets of capital Yerevan, calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who has stressed that although painful, the deal was necessary to prevent the Azerbaijan from seizing control over the entire Nagorno-Karabakh region. A smaller protest on Tuesday saw a dozen arrests by police. For the first time since 2015, the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission met this Wednesday to discuss Somalia and explore how the international community can support its peacebuilding priorities and find joint solutions to some of the challenges the country faces.
But can be brought about through the sustenance and reform of indigenous wisdoms, while learning and adopting good practice from other experiences. We have learned the hard way of being engulfed in conflict and trying quick fix solutions to restoring peace. We will strive to safeguard inclusive solutions that are Somalia-owned and grounded on local context and environment.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurienglish.net. Also, if you feel so inclined, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.